Hey, Eric.
Hey, Mickey, how you doing?
Fine. We're in the middle of Brokeback Fever here in Hollywood.
It must be very exciting over there.
We just can't quit it. What can I say? But I won't tediously go into the latest box office numbers. I haven't eaten crow yet on my prediction that Brokeback Mountain would not play in the Heartland.
Yeah. Okay.
It looks like it's going to be very close whether it hits 50 million or not, which is the point at which I have to eat crow.
It's playing very big here in...
So let's talk about something else.
Okay.
There's this Zawahiri attempt to kill the Al-Qaeda number 2, which I'm not that familiar with. But
yeah. And I would say I'm vaguely familiar with, so okay.
Okay, well, you win.
A little bit familiar with.
You go first, then.
Okay. So, should we... let's see. They tried to kill him.
Right.
The U.S. with a Predator drone. This is all, secondhand, and one of the weird issues is where we're all getting this information. It's, it's through intelligence officials in the U.S., but also through Pakistani officials. And so, I don't know if you've wondered this, but I've kind of wondered what game the Pakistanis are playing. In other words, when they say, geez, we're so upset that the U.S. did this.
Right, when they helped us plan it.
Right. I mean, presumably, I have no idea, but it seems reasonable that if I were them, I would, agree to let the U.S. do it and then complain very loudly should it go badly.
Well, that's clear. The interesting thing to me seems to be, if we did get him, would it be in their interest to deny it? Because if you read the New York Times and Washington Post accounts, the U.S. is still holding out some hope that we got him, and the Pakistani people are saying, no, you didn't.
That's possible. I mean, I would suspect that they didn't get him just because of the kind of Occam's razor principle, but it's possible, I suppose. The other thing is, I saw an account in the AP, I think it was, where they talked about. This was an AP reporter who visited the village where the strike happened, and talked about 3 different buildings that had been hit. They described them as hundreds of yards apart. So, which is interesting, because a Predator drone, so far as I know, actually only carries 1 missile. Maybe 2, but I'm pretty sure only 1. And so, it looks like it was a sort of a larger strike than one would initially suspect.
Well, maybe there was more than 1 Predator.
Maybe there was more than 1 Predator, but nevertheless, you're still talking about, to me, it raises issues, frankly, of the accuracy of the strike. I mean, if you're hitting multiple buildings,
right,
and it raises questions of how sort of far are you willing to go into?
That's a very good point. How careful were we?
Right. Right. I mean, I wrote a piece a few years ago, actually, for Slate. Not to pimp a piece I wrote a few years ago, but that talked about the sort of lack of clarity, literally in terms of the picture that a Predator gives. Right. So what they rely on is less any sort of picture or anything than obviously intel. Right. So I think one of the questions here is it's anecdotal, but how good is our intel? How good is our intel in this instance, and what does it say about our intel in general?
We obviously thought it was good. I wouldn't accuse them of acting in bad faith of just going off on a whim.
Absolutely. But just because you think it's good, I mean,
right.
That doesn't mean anything.
The other thing is that in one of the accounts, the villagers reported seeing these planes flying around for hours, I think even days before the strike. So if the villagers are seeing them and they're sympathetic to Al-Qaeda, what makes us think that Zawahiri is so stupid as to show up for dinner when all these deadly Predator planes are flying around? It seems like we tipped our hand.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing is that the New York Times said, quoted intelligence officials saying as well, if he's dead, they'll talk about it in channels which we monitor. Well, wasn't that like a huge giveaway? I mean,
yeah, I mean, who knows the games who knows the games that are going on there? I mean, you got me. It could be stupid. It also could be what, a feint, perhaps? I mean, I don't know.
Maybe they, maybe we killed 4 or 5 of Al Qaeda's number 3s. We're good at getting them.
Right, the number 3s. I mean, I actually saw a reference very early on saying, and this is all again through the Pakistanis, and like, how the hell did those guys know so soon who we killed or who we didn't kill? You know, I mean, it's in an area that's not even really under Pakistani control.
Right, and what makes us think that if we got him, that his people didn't pull the body out and take him back,
right?
You know, and hide it.
Right, but I mean, but none of that is to suggest. None of that raises the likelihood, really, that they got him. I mean, it remains a possibility.
Right, but we don't know how they know.
Right, we don't know how they know. But what I was going to say is that one of the very early reports I saw was saying something along the lines of, well, there were some sort of militants. Somebody acknowledging, I don't think it was like a villager, but it was somebody saying there were some militants and they were around the area and they were killed in a house that also had family members in it. You know. And so, so that seems to be a possibility, which is something, by the way, that happens all the time in Iraq.
Right, right.
Because, you can't have such sort of fine-honed intel to know if family members are inside. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, no, and people have families, so they tend to live where their families are. Okay. Issue 2. Whoops, that was a terrible ring. Hang on.
Yeah, that's better.
I'll give you a better one here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's better.
All right.
Alito. It looks like it's going to be confirmed.
Very exciting.
There's the lingering suspicion among people who tend to resist right-wing judicial activism that one really should vote against him. And I thought the Washington Post editorial saying, well, we disagree with him, but he's smart and the president's owed deference was completely wrong. I think the point of view of the Bork hearings is even if you're smart and you're the choice of the president, if you don't like him, you don't have to vote for him. And it's just a question of political prudence whether you think the next judge is going to be better or worse, whether you vote for him or against him.
And why is an editorial adopting political prudence? I mean, they're already sort of boring enough already, basically.
Well, it was pretty boring, but it was sort of I thought it was sort of a cop-out. I mean, they should bother to enumerate. It relieves them of the need to figure out whether he's really bad. And I made a mistake when I was talking about it in the last episode, because I said that this idea that the president can disobey a law passed by Congress because somehow he has inherent authority was crazy, and Alito didn't subscribe to it. And that was wrong. It turns out I misread this case, Youngstown Sheet and Tube, which I never understood in law school, if I remember. And everybody goes off on Justice Jackson's concurrence in that, where he says, well, if Congress has entered the field and written a statute, then the president's power is at its lowest ebb. But he doesn't say the president never beats the statute. He just says it's at a low ebb. So there's still some wiggle room there for a judge, for some reason or another, to say, despite the president's low ebb, he still wins. And it still seems crazy to me, but that is not that's the view that Alito subscribed to at the hearings, and it's a mainstream view. The mainstream view seems insane to me. It seems to me, the Constitution says the president shall faithfully execute the laws. That means if there's a law, the president has to follow it. I mean, what else does it mean? So if Congress passed a law and the president signs it, it seems to me that the issue is over.
But have you been following the sort of false signing statements issue bubbling up?
Yes, although that seems...
It's related. I mean, it's not the same thing.
They're related, but that seems, why can't the president say what he thinks the law is? I mean...
Well, no, but it's not that he can't say what he thinks the law is. It's indicative of potentially a sort of sign that he might not carry out the law, right? I mean, what he would view as just an interpretation of the law and what is a correct interpretation could be viewed as other. I mean, the obvious example is McCain, right?
Right.
Where he says, well, this is, we plan on following this, but of course there could be national security considerations.
Right, and that's a good point. He's saying, I'm not going to follow the law, and then if he's sued, then maybe, the clear language of the law he'll be forced to abide by it. But that's only if he's sued. In the interim, he's sort of saying, I'm going to do whatever I want.
Right. That's actually the interesting issue. It's not so much the down the line, because it might end up, there might end up being a suit or whatever, but far down the line. The question is he actually going to, follow through with it or not?
But Freed's, so he has the advantage on the legislature because he's the one who actually carries out the law.
Right. He's the one who carries it out.
Because what Charles Freed said at the hearings about legislative history is completely true. It's written by staffers, and they put everything in there. But the kitchen sink to make, liberal legislation as liberal as possible or conservative legislation as conservative as possible. I've written it. It's a total crock. The members of Congress never read the darn things. And if the president wants to have his competing little, gloss on the text, I don't see anything wrong with it. But your point is a good one, that the president has the upper hand because he gets to enforce his interpretation.
Right.
But that's a good point. I may elaborate more on my blog, my attempt to why I think all of American law about executive power is crazy.
The world awaits.
But I'm sure you can probably stand to wait until then. Okay.
Okay.
Iraq. I think that's your baby.
Iraq. Okay. Well, I want to make. I think there are actually two interesting developments that somewhat intersect enough that I can mention them both right now.
Okay.
And that would be one. And I'm surprised this hasn't gotten more coverage than it has. Is this sort of bubbling news that the administration isn't planning on asking for any money for reconstruction? Maybe it's so obvious. Maybe it's so obvious that we weren't going to do that.
It's not obvious. I always assumed that the answer was there was so much money in the pipeline that was unspent that we didn't need to ask for any more.
Yeah, it's not the case. Almost all the money is there are these distinctions. Is it allocated versus, sort of how far down in the pipeline it is. But it's almost all sort of accounted for at this point.
But if it's accounted for, if you gave it to a contractor to do a 10-year project to build a pipeline, then maybe we've spent enough money if the money's going to be spent this year.
I'm pretty darn sure that's the case because, one of the other issues you had was this shift of a lot of the money that was for reconstruction. First of all, a lot of the money went for these large-scale projects that were somewhat of a money sink early on because of inefficiencies, because of the insecurity, and et cetera.
Right.
And then they did this shift toward small-scale projects.
Right.
So there was sort of an inefficiency in the switch, probably in and of itself. But one of the largest issues was some large amount of money, somewhere between a third, 40%, something like that, ended up going toward security costs.
Right.
And then you cut the percentage that goes for overhead, you cut the percentage that goes for profit, and you actually, there was some study that was done, maybe it was the Brookings Institution or somebody, ended up doing the total amount of money that went to reconstruction itself. Mm-hmm. And it was a pretty small number. I mean, I'm not going to make it up because I don't remember it.
Well, maybe they figure that the private sector could be more efficient, and B, the Iraqis are in a sort of dependency relationship with the United States where they depend on our aid, and it's about time that they face the imperatives of raising a bunch of private investment money, which means getting their act together and having that stick over them. I assume that that's what the administration is thinking.
I mean, I assume the administration
it makes no sense otherwise.
Well, I mean, I assume the administration is thinking that it doesn't have, that there isn't the political will to put any more money into
Not to put any more money? You spend $80 billion one year and zero the next?
No, it was $18 billion over 2 years, and, I don't know. I mean, it's a good question because I don't understand. I would suspect that there's a more craven reason for it, frankly. I would assume there's more of a political reason. But whatever the intentions are, I also think it's a mistake. Well, for two reasons. One is you still have, incredibly limited electricity in Iraq, right? You have 4 hours in many places and half a day in most places and whatever. So you still have sort of major infrastructure issues. And I can't imagine that you're still not, given the security situation, in a stage where you need to jumpstart some of that stuff. I mean, you're not going to get large corporations to invest. It's not going to make it's just not going to happen, right? So then the other question becomes, one of the things, if you want to do, is try to diffuse the insurgency, pump in some money, although I think that has a very sort of checkered history of working. Fair enough. One of the other issues, and this is the other point, is that it plays into our decreasing leverage, right? I mean, to the degree that we stop spending money, if you kind of look at it in region by region, if you're trying to convince a governor in wherever to toe your line, to do whatever you want to do as the U.S., to the degree that you've got no money in your pocket anymore, you have a lot less leverage on your side. And that plays into this larger dynamic of the U.S. You hear these rumblings about how the U.S. has taken the side of Sunnis now to push Shiites to give more Sunni representation.
Right.
Right? So, which is, I think, a great development. I think to the degree that we can do that and not screw it up, and I think it's a hard thing not to screw up and whatever, but it's generally, I think, a good development, except that our leverage is decreasing by the day. If we don't give any more money, it decreases more. I mean, there are various ways of leverage, the military and so forth, but money is one of them, and I don't see why we should give that up.
I don't either. One would expect Bush to come forward and justify it. I mean, if the point is that our boys haven't died in vain, it seems to me you don't give up whatever hard-earned leverage they had to save a few $1 billion.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, it's all sort of speculation at this point. All this, there have been two big stories about it. One in the Washington Post, one in the LA Times, and both have said, the White House is expected not to ask for any more money or has no plans to ask for any more money. But I assume at some point there's a trigger, for when the supplemental would be due or something.
But this could be just like a State of the Union trial balloon. That happens all the time.
Right. So it's theoretically, right, it could be that. But
it hasn't been shot down except by you.
No.
If it is a trial balloon, so they may actually do it.
Yeah, we'll see.
It's interesting, if you read the Iraq blogs, they're going to restate the election results sometime soon to account for fraud. And it's very close. It's like a cliffhanger, whether the Shiite-Kurd alliance will have enough to form a government on its own, or whether the Sunni rejectionist bloc will have enough to block them.
The Sunni rejectionist bloc, right? Yeah.
So, if Hollywood were interested, there's a good plot line. Okay.
All right, bring it.
And the other thing is, this ties in with the Pakistan thing, because Al Qaeda is in real trouble in Iraq. It looks like. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think. I mean, I think that. I don't know the answer to that, except to say that I think there have been these signs of fissure for a long time. And I don't know that anything has particularly changed now, except they got on the front page of the New York Times last week.
Well, but they're having running firefights on the borders of.
Yeah, I know. Which is it's been happening for months, and that doesn't say. I mean, that doesn't give an indication that it's a small thing. I mean, it could be a big development. It's just a longer-term trend. Is all I'm saying.
I should be clear what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Sunnis who are fighting the U.S. getting sick of these Al Qaeda fighters fighting alongside them and killing a bunch of their fellow Muslims. Right. And they are turning on their fellow insurgents and chasing them out of town, basically.
Right. It's clearly the sort of dynamic that the U.S., that sort of cleavage the U.S. needs to take advantage of. Just a side note about that, I saw an interesting point by Spencer Ackerman in the New Republic, who I think made the valid point that, it's a very good development for the U.S. It also suggests that if the U.S., and Spencerman advocates pulling the U.S. out. He said it also suggests that if the U.S. were to pull out, it might not turn into the terrorist haven that everybody sort of assumes that it would.
And that is a good point.
Yeah.
But according to Murtha, we are pulling out as fast as we can.
Right.
Do you believe that?
I think, the whole notion of that the U.S. Army can't sustain itself strikes me as sort of reasonably valid, but probably kind of overdone in some sense. So that we could actually carry on kind of more than the sort of doomsday scenarios of the wheels coming off the army. But I don't know.
Right, but Murtha is suggesting that the Bush administration has bought into his idea, which seems.
Yeah, no, I know, but one of his sort of reasons is has always been it's going to happen anyway. It's going to happen. Partially for political reasons, but partially for the sort of logistical reasons that the army can't sustain itself.
Right. It's interesting that the conventional wisdom on Murtha is completely turned around. Now everybody assumes that the reason the war is that Bush's slide in popularity stopped is because Murtha made the issue, what do we do now, not did you lie us into war in the first place. And that
Is that why everybody assumes this thing has turned around?
I've seen op-eds. Chris Matthews, who was a big Murtha defender, said it yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
He said, hey, I thought Murtha was good for the Democrats. It turned out Murtha was bad for the Democrats. Him coming out and calling for withdrawal was the turning point against the Democrats. So he more or less admitted he'd done a complete about-face. I claim to have called this. No, John
All right.
Podhoretz called this. I didn't call it.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
I only make inaccurate predictions. Medicare Part D. I tried to read the Consumer Reports Guide for how to apply for your Medicare prescription drug benefit.
I didn't realize you were that old.
I'm not that old, but my mother is, and she gets Consumer Reports.
You're a good kid.
And I stole her Consumer Reports. It's unbelievably complicated. Now, Consumer Reports is they're liberals who'd probably rather have a government-run program than the program Bush passed, which relies on private insurers to provide the coverage.
No, I have to say, actually, I visited my grandmother recently and read the the government's own sort of pamphlet on it, and was just as confused as you were.
The Consumer Reports may have been making it intentionally confusing because they obviously want to junk this law and just make it part of regular old Medicare, where the government, you need a drug, the government will pay for it. That always has made sense to me. I've instinctively never understood what exactly giving it to the free market is going to do to improve the delivery of health care, given that if you rely on the market, then you have the selling costs of all these insurance salesmen going around. You have the natural tendency of insurance salesmen to try to bilk you by writing in some little loophole that's going to exclude the real expenditure you need when you need it. And you have the inability to, if you eat at the market works with restaurants, because if you eat at a bad restaurant, you're just not going to go back there again. You go to a good restaurant. But if somebody does a bad heart transplant on you, that's it. Your life is over. You're not going to, I'll go to a better transplant specialist next time.
Well, you also don't know what. I mean, one of the issues is that there's a sort of, how many times you hear this stuff about people getting bad combos of prescriptions or whatever. I mean,
right.
It's a side thing, but yeah, there's sort of less transparency in the whole thing. Yeah.
Now the problems that the saving grace. I mean, when you read these stories, you think, oh my God, they're going to repeal this thing, the way they repealed the catastrophic health care plan about a decade ago. The one saving grace is the problems seem to be restricted to Medicaid recipients, people who had been getting their drugs paid through Medicaid and now have
right. Well, because that's how the program has started. Am I wrong about that? That it's actually not dealing with other people?
No, I think it's dealing with everybody. But that's the second point I wanted to make. A lot of people who aren't poor are excluded. For example, my mother, who was very worried that once this came in, her private insurer was going to say, okay, the government's paying for your drugs, you're on your own.
Right.
Her insurer did not say that, and most of insurers seem to have said, look, just don't sign up for this program. Your benefits are better now. Just stay out of it.
Right.
So it's sort of turning into a program for the poor, which is not a bad thing, but it means the chances of there being a massive outrage, stretching across all the classes, is diminished.
Right.
That's a standard liberal point that poor people have no voice, so they have less voice, and that seems to be the case. Although the governors of virtually every state have now stepped in to save the federal government's bacon.
Yeah.
Even Governor Schwarzenegger, who's a liberal now, by the way.
I know.
Okay. There's one more thing I wanted to comment about, which is this Barrett report, which is the Barrett is the last special prosecutor left over from the Clinton administration. He was investigating Henry Cisneros, who was the Secretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, who was convicted of lying about the amount of money he gave to his mistress. Everybody knows that. That's old news. What we were hoping, his report has been under wraps for years and years. It's finally coming out on Thursday. What people who suspect Clinton of evil wrongdoing were hoping was that the report would show that he had politicized the IRS. Forget Cisneros, that he had ordered the politicos had ordered audits of Paula Jones, of a couple of other women who had affairs with Clinton, of anybody who spoke out with Clinton. There were too many of them not to raise suspicions. But the leak of the Barrett report in the Sun, the New York Sun today, has none of that. It doesn't have any of the politicization of the IRS, except in this one case of Henry Cisneros. Well, I mean, that's sort of disappointing. Yeah, sure, so Clinton acted to protect his cabinet secretary. That's not that scary. What would be scary is if you knew that if you spoke out against Clinton, you were going to be audited. And apparently, unless there's like another leak waiting to drop, the report does not have that, and it's sort of a major disappointment. It's a scandal.
A major disappointment for
Clinton supporters who nevertheless suspect that there was some dirty business going on there. I mean, Mike McCurry at the time says, we're not going to audit our opponents. We're not. The reason is because we're not insane. Because that's what brought down, that was one of the raps against Nixon.
So it appears as if they didn't do that.
It appears that, there's no evidence that they're not insane.
Right.
There's no evidence that they are insane.
Right.
So that the charge that, and the right wing is completely ignoring the fact that the charge that everybody thought was going to be made doesn't seem to have been made in this report. It's a bust. It's a Comet Kahutek of reports.
So why was there all this sort of speculation from the beginning, by the way, that...
I think it was encouraged by leaks from Barrett's office and various right-wing columnists. I think Bob Novak wrote a column about sort of hinting at it.
So this would be an instance, by the way, because we discussed this, last month, and I was suggesting that there was very little mainstream media coverage of it, right? Very little non-conservative media coverage of it?
That's right. I mean, occasionally something on the back pages. And a lot of it has been redacted. The Democrats got them to blank out a lot of names.
All right, hence the sort of speculation, right?
Right. So we said, God, they must be scared of something if they're bothering to black out large sections, and they originally tried to suppress the whole thing. Now, it's possible that there's some horrible scandal in the blacked out pages, but if what's blacked out is just names, I don't see quite how that happens. But, I'm open to any sort of paranoia about Clinton, but my hopes are dashed at the moment.
Bummer. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well.
All right.
I'll go back to the whirlwind of glamorous Hollywood parties.
I'll go back to Brooklyn.
Cool.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to hit stop now. Have a good evening.
Good talking to you.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.